I always think if you're just trying to do, if you don't know what to do, always try and figure out what the loving thing to do is. And I think that will, in some way or another, lead you along a path of getting closer to probably what your purpose, is that will really resonate with people.
Welcome to Insights Unlocked, an original podcast from User Testing, where we bring you candid conversations and stories with the thinkers, doers, and builders behind some of the most successful digital products and experiences in the world, from concept to execution.
Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Principal Content Marketing Manager at User Testing. And our guest today is Steven Sakach. Steven is co-founder of aiCMO and founder CEO of Zero Company. He has 3 decades of experience in digital media, journalism, and human consciousness studies. He also co-hosts the Bliss Business Podcast. Welcome to the show, Steven.
Great to be here.
Steven, you've had a fascinating journey from your journalism background to digital marketing to building AI tools that aim to make business more human. Can you share a bit more about what sparked your focus on empathy in marketing and why that became such a core part of your work?
Yeah. I remember going to this consciousness event way back when, and we were all, talking about like oneness and integral theory and all these sort of things. And, sitting around at breakfast, and they're like, so how are you going to apply this to your business? And, I'm thinking back then it's like search engine marketing. I'm like, we've got, one title and a couple descriptions. I have no idea how I'm going to apply, all these higher concepts, to marketing. And so really it became kind of a journey on, well, what does it look like to be, these higher consciousness businesses? And you've kind of seen this movement, recently of this sort of conscious capitalism movement, which is really this move in consciousness from modern consciousness to a postmodern consciousness, where you're taking on a lot wider perspectives. And so where you're really more empathetic in how you run your business. And, in that other consciousness area, you're kind of really focused business-wise on, the investor owner. This is the sole thing, is the sole pursuit of profit. And then as you move to this conscious capitalism approach, it's more like, okay, not just the investor owner, but now also, what's in our employees' best interest, our customers' best interests, our partners, our vendors, our community and environment. And you kind of make decisions through that lens for your business. So is there a marketing side to this? Yes. And I think a lot of it really surrounds itself around your purpose and your higher purpose. And as businesses evolve, they start to articulate that higher purpose a little bit better, to where it's not just profit. They're also looking at profit, people, planet, and purpose, when they're evolving their consciousness as a group. And so, this is where we really started to lean into focusing on purpose in your business, trying to get that higher purpose of your business articulated. Because when you can do that, you see all these businesses as they evolve. That really becomes the boss, is the purpose. You start to align every decision around that purpose. And so with all of that, I think 2 things really kind of become more and more important with your marketing. And it's empathy and it's connecting to purpose.
It seems like that's a hard thing to reach. You can only think of a handful of companies that have been very successful with that, right? Patagonia would be one. And then you see where it was clearly focused on the purpose, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, but then gets sold off to a company that wasn't really its purpose. And now they're in this state of flux going on right now. So like how do you,
It really is. I mean, that's a really great point, especially with Ben & Jerry's. There's this, there's a few books on this that show these different businesses that operate at this higher consciousness level. And sometimes when you bring in someone who's operating from that more traditional business level, the sole pursuit of profit, it just wreaks havoc on the business, because it's like a regression move. And so this is like you mentioned, Patagonia is a great example of one that's really this next level, that all the decisions are made from Patagonia about their purpose. They aren't going to come up with an ad like, don't buy this jacket that goes viral. If they aren't so aligned with the purpose that they're asking questions like that can come up with this concept. But like you mentioned, like Ben and Jerry's, this is a really interesting time to see what's going to happen with that, because historically it has not gone well when you've seen that happen with the business. But it's a very difficult thing, and that's why we really started trying to develop this AI chief marketing officer, is because we know that process is difficult, and trying to take someone through that, we thought AI could actually do a pretty good job of that, if done right. And what's amazing when you take small companies, mid-sized companies through that and they're articulating it for the first time, you just see everything kind of come to life. Like their marketing starts to have soul. The organization starts to have this, it starts to become kind of this living organization versus the old way. It's just this very dead, dry system that we're in, where we're, opening up the vein, Monday through Friday, can't wait for the day to be done. And it's just this exhausting problem that we've got, really. With, if you look at the data, it's about 80% of the world workforce is disengaged. And this is amazing. This is like amazing, almost tragedy, because we're going to work without meaning. And so I think there's a huge opportunity here for marketers to help find that meaning in people's work. And it does start with asking those questions about purpose.
Well, yeah. And I think, like there's some sort of if you can do that, and what happens is that you find your true audience, right? That audience that will make you do all the things that you want out of life. Will give you that profit that you want. And I toss out, big brand examples, but like the other 98% of companies, what are they doing? What are they getting wrong about empathy in their messaging? Like where are they? How can they better connect emotionally with their customers through marketing? And and maybe we can understand how to do that better by understanding what they're doing wrong. Maybe you have some ideas.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. For sure. I think it really does kind of start with, you got to be about it as a company. The stories you tell need to be authentic. You can't pander. Like we're right now, like this younger generation, this is the most marketed to generation in existence, right? And they're going to sniff out the BS a mile away, and it's going to backfire on you badly. For like a Patagonia, like you mentioned, though, they're about it, right? We all understand that. And we're kind of living that journey with them. We want to see ourselves in that situation. But, the opposite side of that, we looked into business scandals, right? And looked at how they failed on the various different verticals and broke those down by their systems and what part of their systems failed. And a huge chunk of them failed because they lacked an authentic purpose. And so that was a huge chunk. The other part was like the feedback loops were like, suppressed in that process. But like you look at Wells Fargo, marketing, they built up this great campaign over decades of, the old stagecoaches and how trusted they were in the gold rush days. And then at some point their business wasn't about it. And the scandals kind of followed that we all know about. And it really killed this story that was told for decades. And it's just hard to recover from that if you're not authentic. And so I think that's really, you got to make sure your business is about it, because you can talk the talk, but if you aren't walking that at the same time, this generation and people are just we're just very savvy about the messages that are coming at us these days.
So that if we want to find that true authentic self in our messaging and in our marketing, what are some steps that we need to take to kind of get going with that?
Yep, that's a good question. So, where we like to start with, I think, is really when you think about businesses, a lot of times when they're growing, they sometimes lose their way when they get to the stage of like scaling, right? They start things going fast, they're making shortcuts, they're building systems. And then what happens, you start to lose your story. Sometimes you never even had it at this point. And so we have this kind of mantra that we use. It's called BLISS, which is build love into scalable systems. And so if you're asking yourself that, how can I build love into this part of my business? And you're kind of doing that over and over. I think this is a good way to help you find those values and a good way to maybe articulate them, because you'll kind of figure out that higher purpose along the way. When you're doing that, you find out, how is my business in service to others? How is it making a positive difference in people's lives? And how can we do more of that? And so this gets you to a place, I think, where you're getting closer to that higher purpose. If we can get closer in proximity to really love in what we're doing, we're going to find higher purpose more often than not in that kind of work. And once you can at least define some sort of higher purpose, it's going to be, almost always kind of this empathetic kind of thing. And now you can use that as kind of guide rails for your marketing. And so, we're wondering ourselves, like, okay, can we take this process and can we scale this, out to other businesses? And so is really having this interaction with AI, I think that helps kind of guide us through this process, because it's a very difficult process, like you're thinking to get there with that, pulling that purpose out of some businesses when they've never articulated it.
So how's that work? Tell me more about that with the AI.
Yeah. So we developed the AI Chief Marketing Officer platforms at aiCMO.io, it's really trying to help, small businesses, small marketing teams kind of take a more empathetic approach to their marketing. So one of the first places we try and help companies start with is defining that higher purpose. So we're taking you through like a series of questions. And, I've seen some people spend a long time at this. We also have AI prompts that do really well, like, hey, does this sound like you? So you can get through it in like 5-10 minutes. But all we really want from it is something that closely aligns with what you're feeling as far as your higher purpose. Because then we can take that, and now whenever we're creating like ideas for, your campaigns, we've got these kind of guide rails that, hey, can we tie it back to this in some way? So if you want to create, your social posts, your blog articles, your Google ads, your emails, you can always kind of have these guide rails of this purpose in there. And it comes up with some really creative ideas on campaigns and some of the brainstorming tools that we have that really are trying to help resonate, with your purpose and with other people in the process. And a lot of time is spent on trying to make emotional connection and how we could do that. And which is why we kind of started our podcast, is because we wanted to make sure you're authentic throughout your business, because, we can help you do all this stuff, but we really don't want you to be, just talking the talk and not being about it.
So when you mentioned starting the podcast and you're out finding, what's your experience been like? Are you finding the businesses that are getting this or understanding this?
Yeah, we did. So we started this process we kind of did this keyword research on businesses with, words like love and empathy, and turned out maybe about 8-9% had some sort of part of that in there. So, okay, there's a group of people on here. That's actually a pretty decent sized chunk out there. And it is kind of closely related to, if you're looking at different stages of consciousness, the percentages at some of these higher stages is around, that kind of number. So then we're like, okay, let's go see if we can talk to some of these businesses about, their experience and how they're building empathy, building love into it. And it's just, I'm never not amazed at how many good people are actually out there. We're living in a very skeptical time, but there are people who are really trying hard to, help find meaning, help finding connection with each other in the workplace and with their customers. And it's been a fun process. I've been loving it for sure. It's like the highlight of my week is just talking with people about these types of businesses.
That sounds great. I feel like some listeners are going to be wondering, like, how can AI help you be more empathetic when it's really just built on, Seinfeld episodes? How do you address that?
Yeah. So it's like, you're asking like, can artificial intelligence make us more real? Right. So,
Right. That's such a better way of saying it.
yeah, no, we've thought about that quite a bit too, but, really too. And some of the areas where people get a little upset about AI is like in art and things like that, and artists. And so we've even talked to artists that were, the traditional sort of artists now working with AI, hey, how are you able to navigate this area? And the way they've described it is really it's this co-creation process where it's kind of like a jazz session where, right, like we're just a little back and forth and we're co-creating here. And so it's really kind of interesting with AI and where it's going and how much of that co-creation is. But what we really want our tools to do is actually prompt us. We think of AI about prompting AI. We want it to prompt us, to be more aligned with a higher purpose, to connect more empathetically in our marketing. You can use it to prompt us to be better humans. And, I think a lot of times with marketing, we're really kind of focused on, just numbers and transactions and those kind of stories. But, there's this whole experience in there. There's connection, that can be made, and people can be really moved by what you're doing in your business. And, marketing shouldn't stop even once the sale is made. I think a lot of people think it's like marketing is kind of over, but there's 17 consumption emotions when you're experiencing a product, right? And you want to be on the positive side of those. So we really, want to help businesses try and exceed those expectations if we can. So we've even got a tool in there on like surprise and delight, kind of helping you come up with creative ideas to help in that process. So again, it's this co-creative process on how we can connect emotionally better with our audiences. And so when you do that, like if we're talking about the transactions and the numbers, there's studies that show if you can emotionally connect with an audience, your average lifetime value is going to increase 306%, on average, over satisfied customers, over just the ones you think are kind of satisfied and happy. But if you can make that emotional connection and take it a level deeper, these are the ones that are going to be with you through, all sorts of whatever ups and downs you have, because they're really invested emotionally with you. And like I said, the only way you can do that though is really be authentic in that process.
How do you get confirmation as you're moving through this process that you're on the right track? Like we decide that this is our purpose, this is our authentic purpose, and stay with it, I guess, right? Because you could think that, but maybe your current audience is not that. Maybe being truly authentic and understanding who you are means that there's a different audience that you need to go out and get. I don't know. Like there's a lot of friction there, I think, if the current audience you have is not really part of that, right? If the Patagonia audience just wanted a jacket, they didn't really care how the jacket was made, right? There are other brands I can go, but originally they didn't know that. They didn't know that. Oh, I know some people that don't know that about Patagonia, and they're just, that was okay. Let me start this question over. 5 years ago, it might have been, there were a lot of hipster Wall Street traders that were wearing the Patagonia vests just to wear the Patagonia vests. They weren't committed. They were on the opposite end.
Totally opposite.
Patagonia's mission. If that was originally Patagonia's audience, how do they get back aligned?
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because like a lot of the, like when you're saying hipster Wall Street types, I'm just picturing like they think of purpose as, shareholder value, increased shareholder value. This is the purpose. This is not going to motivate anyone. This is the status of where consciousness is kind of at, right? And like if that was Patagonia's story, they wouldn't be Patagonia at all. And that's just not something that resonates with people. It doesn't resonate with the employees. And that's like that old sort of older business model where I think we see this younger generation especially evolving very fast past that kind of thinking. Because of all the work of us, our older generations, where we kind of slogged through it all. It's just the gravity of consciousness, though, is much higher now than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whether you think so or not right now. But it gets the younger generation is getting up there much faster to where they want a product like Patagonia versus wherever else, just the jacket or stuff, because of that meaning. And so I think even if your audience isn't right there, for sure, the younger generation audiences, this is where it's going. This is kind of the future. But your purpose can be kind of co-created with your audience if you want to. In fact, like some of the best ways that you're going through that is being very transparent on what you want to do. Maybe you think you want to do something eco-friendly related and you're not quite sure and you're not quite hitting the right note, but if you're sharing like your struggles while you're doing that, with your community, that's how it becomes kind of a community. It's like, oh, they start getting involved. Maybe you should try this, and it becomes, again, this other sort of co-creation process on your purpose. But going back to like the bliss approach, I always think if you don't know what to do, always try and figure out what the loving thing to do is. And I think that will, in some way or another, lead you along a path of getting closer to probably what your purpose, is that will really resonate with people.
In the business world, we always go to these business cases. Patagonia is always one. Southwest Air is always another. I'm just wondering if there's an example of a time when an emotionally resonant marketing campaign, either yours or someone else's, made a lasting impact on customers or changed the course of a brand.
Yeah, this is a really good question. We actually, as part of developing our AI Chief Marketing Officer, we have this massive file on all these types of campaigns. But I think, when people do bring that up, one of the campaigns that does come to mind is, it's kind of a revolutionary campaign at the time, was the Dove Real Beauty campaign, which is about 21 years ago this month, when it was launched. And it was really based on that only 2% of women worldwide saw themselves as beautiful, largely because of advertisers and bombarding with images and, what the ideal beauty is. And so I have a daughter who's now 20 years old, and being in advertising and marketing industry, I don't want to contribute to this problem, and with social media now, it's just constant. It's just worse. So Dove took their millions of dollars in advertising and put it into billions and billions of ad impressions that put good into the world. And I think that changed their brand, and they're still doing it today. They're still, because it resonated, people identified with these campaigns in a deep way, really, because Dove kind of found that higher purpose, and they haven't strayed from it. And so, if you think about that authenticity, something they did 20 years ago is still going to resonate today. It wasn't like they just jumped on some trend, to pander to some trend. This is what they're about. And so as marketers, I do think this is a great opportunity, is when you can kind of focus on that and asking ourselves, how we can build love into what we're doing, because it resonates. And I've been in those meetings with the, CEOs where we're talking about the products and the benefits, and, we're trying to figure out the marketing, approach for all that. And then been just stopping and saying, okay, wait, let's take a step back and look at, why you came up with this product to begin with. And it was really, because you cared about your family and your loved ones. And so you made this product and you made this service. And then all of a sudden, just having that conversation, you see kind of the light bulbs come off, and you see people kind of energized and all like, yes, that's it. And this becomes kind of that North Star of that brand. So you saw it with Dove kind of change how they're doing things, and they've been doing it ever since. But you can see it in small companies when as soon as you find that kind of North Star, now you can start telling those stories around that really energize people and kind of connect you on a deeper level.
Yeah, I that's such a great example, and I can't believe it's 20 years.
I know.
And it's really changed everything. All advertising, I think, has been affected by that campaign in some fashion, right? I mean, just what a beautiful woman is, right? Is not just, I'm not going to even get into this topic and get myself in trouble, but as also a father, of a daughter. It's important to me too that
Yeah.
my daughter feels confident in her own skin. So yeah, I'm so thankful to that, and just see how it's done well. And I can't speak to an example, but I know I've read about them where a brand tried to copy that. They were trying because it was trendy and everybody was writing about how Dove's doing this, and we'll get people who don't look like our normal artists and we'll call it good, right? And it backfired on them completely.
Yeah.
Again, there are examples there.
There's like
I'll put them in the show notes. But.
We might remember a Pepsi commercial, 5 years ago or so, I think, where they really tried to pander to kind of the social justice, movement at the time. And
yes, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That could be what you're thinking of, because it just absolutely 100% backfired, because everyone just like, yeah, you're not about it. This is just you're pandering to improve sales.
With Jenner, right? Or one of the Kardashians.
Yeah. So that's like, I think that might be the example you're thinking of. But it's just like, if you're not about it, this is why you really need to think, operationally, what are we doing inside and out our company? Are we about this purpose? And audit your company in relation to that purpose.
I think, and maybe even just bring somebody new in to ask you, and maybe this is what the aiCMO does. It just forces you through that exercise to ask questions that you just have assumptions about, right? Like, oh, we've always done it this way, or well, just articulate that then. Who are your customers? When's the last time you talked to them? Or because you don't know, and we were talking before the show got started. That I used to be also in the Navy, or we were talking at some point in time. I would mention I was in the Navy and I was on a submarine, and we would come up to the surface every 6 hours just to get a GPS fix. Back in those days, and the intent, I was like, wow, why do we always have to do this? Because it was a lot of work for me as a radioman. I have to kind of get ready. I have to try and get, communications either sent out or received during this time. And I hated it. And, the point was made, was like, well, if we're not checking to see if we're on the right course, if we're off by even just a degree or two after, 12 hours, 24 hours, we could be really way off target. And it's important to kind of stay on course. And this is an exercise that we should all do, I think, right?
Yeah, well, I agree too. And especially as you grow, I think that's really where the problems start happening, is because things are going fast, and maybe the original ideas of the company, the founder founded it on, or, what really made you successful in the beginning of your early days, they just kind of get lost in systems, within systems, and it just becomes kind of an afterthought a lot of times. Whereas what we see in these more consciously evolved companies is that purpose is the boss. Purpose is what everyone's aligned, and you have freedom as an employee, to get to that purpose. They aren't going to tell you a lot of times. You have freedom, and you're empowered to get us to that purpose, and so that's where you get the creativity and the innovation in that process. Is because this is where we want to get to. And so as long as that purpose is this is a good point. As long as that purpose is a higher purpose, like a good purpose, is what I tend to say. Because honestly, I think this is where we're going to have a big problem, is if we're just stepping back for a little bit. This is what I worry about with AI, is how good it can be at persuasion and like emotional manipulation, because one of his greatest strengths is it can personalize interactions really well. And if it's, at the same time got a goal in mind, that it can be really good at dog walking people on scale to some sort of goal. So if, going back to what I was talking about in the conscious capitalism, if its sole goal is the pursuit of profit, and it's just optimizing toward that, this is where, the people, planet, everyone gets kind of steamrolled in the process. And I've worked with AI in the early days of AI where we're just focusing on data. And if it's got a goal of a conversion goal or something, and that conversion goal is just off and wrong and not correct, it's going to optimize toward wrong and not correct because that's what it thinks is correct. That's what it's told to do. So really, I think kind of with our product, one of the big things is we really want people to put good into the world. And so we're trying to help them take a more conscious approach to the business and ask them questions like you mentioned that maybe they hadn't thought about. So we really want to have AI leaning into more of that higher purpose goals because that will be the most empathetic, responsible way to navigate some of these issues that we're going to be facing in the future with this new technology.
Right. And if it's not your tool, it's a tool that they should try and figure out how to add that empathetic guardrail in there. So it's not just, as you mentioned, we're optimizing for a behavior, optimizing for a demographic. You could just look on your news to see how that's playing out, where we've done that. Steven, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I apologize for rambling on taking us in many different directions, but I've really enjoyed it, and I really, I challenge all of us, and I'll bring this to user testing. Is like, what is our higher purpose, and am I doing the work to help us get there and build our audience? So, how do someone learn more about Bliss, about aiCMO, about zero marketing yourself?
Yeah, check out aiCMO.io or our marketing agency at zerocompany.com, ZERO, company spelled out.com. Or check out our podcast. I mean, the Bliss Business Podcast. This is where we're talking about building love into business every week. So it's a mission. And so if you're out there, my higher purpose really is try to get people to build love into some type of system. Don't let it just be a random act of kindness because that's fleeting, right? That can disappear. If you can systemize it in some way where other people can just hop right in and they're going to be prompted to do something loving in this system, and it's continually adding love into what we do and adding good into what we do, little by little, a little can become a lot. So that's really, if you can think about it, what your routines are, what your systems are, how can you add a little love into it?
Wow. That's a great way to end. Thank you again.
Thank you. It was fun.